Hi, I'm Lance Lambert. Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Vehicle Show. We are in Tacoma, Washington at a very special location. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but this is the 400th episode of the Vintage Vehicle Show, and I wanted to do something just a little bit special this time around to acknowledge that. Well, this building right behind me is going to be the start of what I hope is a very interesting story for you. Back in 1962, myself and Bob Dylan, Doug Sparks, Greg Ealing, and Dale Query decided to start a car club. We called it the Steeds Car Club, and this is where we met. We're at 709 South Cedar in Tacoma, Washington, and this is the building where that car club started. The Steeds Car Club was just such a great part of my life. I just have, I'm still filmed with warm and fuzzy memories that all my friends have to put up with me telling old stories about the Steeds Car Club. Well, we had a couple of meetings in this garage. That was in the summer of 1962. The club was made up mostly of Stadium and Wilson High School students. It took off right away. It was a very successful car club. We were very active. We met every Monday night. It costs $3 a year to be a member. So I'm going to show you a little bit more about the club. You're going to see some of the places that we met, hear some stories, and you're going to meet a few of the other past members. So do what I tell you to do every week. Just kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. I think most every city across America has the hangout, the drive-in restaurant, whatever. Well, this was the place in North Tacoma. The Frisco Freeze Drive-In, a very popular place. It started in the late 40s and to this day is extremely popular, and it does not look any different than it did when I was in high school and all the Steeds Car Club members were in high school. This is the place that we hung out. 7 nights a week you could roll in here, the place would be packed, and there'd be all kinds of members from the Steeds Car Club. Had a great burger here. Frisco Freeze kind of has their own style of burger. You won't taste anything like it anywhere else. It was very popular here in town, still is popular. So many stories in this parking lot. You had if you finished a car, if you just got the new paint job on your car, a set of wheels or whatever, this is the first place you headed to show off your car. If you've ever seen American Graffiti, like I know most of you have, this was Mel's. This was Tacoma's Mel's. This is where we hung out. There were always a lot of Steeds members here, and we had great times here.
Motor number 19.
The Steeds had a lot of different places that they held their meetings. Probably over the 3 years that I was an active member of the club, we had about 4 or 5 locations. One of them was right here at this grocery store. One of our members, Sandy Gillespie, his family owned this grocery store. They actually lived in the back of it. It was just one of those little corner grocery stores that doesn't look much different than it does now. Well, the fun thing about this was in the basement was slot car track. We pooled all of our track, and we had a drag strip in the basement where we would race our slot cars, and we had kind of a road race rally back to the beginning of it. One of the other things that we did, we were experts at coming up with fundraising methods that were total disasters. One of them was selling Christmas trees. We went out to Bob Dylan's grandfather's farm in Gig Harbor, Washington, cut down a whole bunch of trees, brought them here. We had a tree stand all set up here. Nobody wanted to spend the night here, so at the end of the day we would take the trees, throw them up on the roof and leave them there overnight, come back the next day, throw them back down and try to sell them. The trees got a little beat up, and we got a little beat up, and we didn't make much money, but it was a lot of fun. So this was one of my favorite places where the club met. A lot of the members, half or even a little bit more, were all Stadium High School students, and this is Stadium High School. I'm a 1965 graduate of the school and very proud of it. This is such a cool place. Originally built as a hotel and became a high school. But this was a breeding ground for great cars. Across the street from here was a parking lot that was always full of pretty cool cars, a lot of 40s and 50s Chevrolets and Fords. But we had a lot of fun here. One of the things that we did is there is a giant bowl here. Anybody in the Northwest knows about the Stadium Bowl. And Sandy Gillespie had a go-kart, and so one night some of the members, we took Sandy's go-kart and went down into the bowl. This was on a Saturday night, and we drove his go-kart around the bowl, which made all kinds of racket bouncing off the concrete in there. And we were drinking beer. We managed to score a little beer at that young age, and so you would take a run around that, and then you would have a little bit of beer, and then you'd take another run around and have a little bit of beer, and we rotated the go-kart between the guys. One of the things that was kind of fun, a little tribute to that, is in the yearbook, when I signed the other guys in the car club's yearbook, there was a picture of the bowl, and I drew just a little tiny beer bottle there and signed my name to it. It was just kind of fun. Of the places that the Steeds Car Club held their meetings while I was a member, this was the main place. We had the longest period of time, and incidentally, this duplex was owned by my dad, and we met in the basement, so that's why we got to meet there. There was a lot of different places that the club met, and the club, I know, of course, as I mentioned, started in '62. I know it went till '77. My mother actually saw a whole bunch of guys with Steeds jackets on in '77. I don't know how much longer the club was together after that. In fact, if you know or if you remember, I want you to get a hold of me. We met every Monday night. My whole week revolved around that Monday night meeting of the Steeds Car Club. This was my favorite location. Another location that the Steeds Car Club hung out at, we didn't really hold our meetings here, but this is a place we used to congregate, is right there. It's a coffee shop now, obviously, but way back when, back in the 60s, it was a very cool garage. This was a real step up for our crowd. Daryl Smith and Bob Dillon, a couple of the really good members in the club, they rented that, built some great cars in there, some real hot rod, late 40s Chevrolets were built on that building. We used to drop by, hang out there a lot. It was really a lot of fun. It wasn't an official meeting place. We didn't actually hold our meetings there. And it's located on 6th Avenue, which in North Tacoma, this is the street. This is the cruising street. We would start at Frisco Freeze, and you would cruise up to King's Drive-In, about a 3-mile strip. And up and down, up and down, up and down. Any of you old hot rodders that went cruising, you know what we're talking about. It was just a ton of fun. You jump in your car and just cruise from one end to the other. This was the spot, 6th Avenue in Tacoma. And apparently it's the spot to have a cup of coffee, so I'm going to take a break and have a little coffee right now. What looks different all of a sudden? Well, what looks different is it's 4 years later at this moment than it was at the beginning of the show. What's that about? Well, we decided to do the history of the club back then, and we got so far into it, and then the project got shelved, set aside, whatever. Well, the club in that 4-year period has started back up. It's very active. There are about 70 members, and we're just going to take off from where we were then. I have 3 guests I'm going to interview. They are 3 of the founding members. Those 3 fellas, myself and Bob Dillon, who couldn't be here today, we were in that garage that I showed you at the beginning of the show. We were in that garage, forming the club, the very first meetings. So let's meet them. Gentlemen, it is really cool that you came to the show today to participate with us. Ladies and gentlemen, the Steeds Car Club, it started out there, the founding members were Greg Ealing, Dale Query, Doug Sparks, Bob Dillon, who couldn't be here today, and me. And for the purpose of this show, I wanted to get the founding members here. So gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out today.
You're welcome.
Sure.
All right. Dale and I have been friends since kindergarten. I met you guys in what, about the 3rd or 4th grade or something?
Yep.
And we've been running around together ever since. Back in the summer of '62, we got together and decided to start the Steeds Car Club. What memories do you have of that time? Doug, do you have any?
Well, I knew you'd start with me on this. My memories are a little vague, but I think probably one thing that I remember the most is our first meetings, coming together as a bunch of 15-year-olds and finding out that we didn't have driver's licenses. And so having a car club without a car was an interesting concept, but we forged ahead, and a year later we were all legal car club members, and I think I remember that the most, right, to start with. Many memories thereafter, but.
Well, in the beginning, we had Bob Dillon's 47 Hudson, we had your 40 Chev. You were one of the big guns because you had a car.
Yeah. I was the only one that had a car at the time, and Bob got his car. I don't know if he got it after me or before.
Mm-hmm. Well, what did you think about, what were a bunch of 15-year-old guys doing starting this club? Dale, what made
Looking
you
for
just-
girls
Yeah,
mostly.
well.
That
So do you remember that first meeting, what it was like, or what your impression was?
It's been a long time, but barely. Yeah, we were talking earlier about whether it occurred in your garage or in Gillespie's basement.
709 South Cedar.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how many times it was in your garage, but then it
I
moved.
think 2 meetings.
Yeah, then it moved down the street to Gillespie's, and it expanded to more takers. But I remember it just being a bunch of guys who were sort of loose knit friends getting together and start. It was a social club to start with, and then cars were on the agenda.
Well, one of the motivators for the beginning of the club was the fact that in Tacoma, the club was the Toppers. And I wanted to be a member of the Toppers. I went to their meetings for a while. They were nice enough to come get me and take me to the meetings. And I wanted to become a member. And they said, well, you can't become a member until you're 16. I was 15 at the time. And they said, but you can start the junior Toppers. And I was so insulted with that. Any Toppers watching this, I'm still angry. But so I went out and got a hold of my buddies and said, let's start our own club. Do you remember how we came up with the name?
I believe I do. I think it was a book you read, and you came in there and said, we just have to name this club the Steeds because it's just so cool. And I guess we all agreed because that's what it came out to.
Well, we were racking our brains trying to find a name for the club, and there was a copy of Ivanhoe on the garage floor, which, you know, around my house, that's where decent literature ended up, was on the garage floor. But I just cracked it open and saw Steeds, and it looked like, well, Steeds, horsepower, whatever. And I think we were so desperate, we were so frustrated, we couldn't come up with a name that, you know, we decided, oh, that was okay, and got that out of the way.
I remember going back and forth. I remember the time that happened. I don't even remember you having a copy of Ivanhoe handy, but great literary giant that you were in those days. But I do remember being in the room with a bunch of the guys and just tossing out, how about this, how about that? I don't remember any of the particulars, but and then there it came.
Yeah. And do you remember how we elected our first president?
Well, that had to be you because you were in charge of everything. I don't remember that.
So
but
the first, and
I've
made probably 5 or 6 smart business decisions in my life. The first one, I'm the age 15, and Bob Dylan, who couldn't be with us here today. Bob, we all looked up to Bob, great guy. The girls loved him, the guys respected him, and I thought, you know, if Bob Dylan ends up being the president of the club, that's going to give us some instant prestige. So I'm not sure how I massaged the situation, but suddenly Bob Dylan's the president, and it worked. I mean, right away it was like, oh, Bob's your president? Oh, well, must be a legitimate club. Must be cool.
He had a car too.
Yeah.
He had a 47 Hudson that was about the size of a Freightliner.
It was about as big as the garage was.
And so that made him very important in our no car club. Car club.
And then we moved, do you remember where we moved to after my garage?
Just Gillespie's.
Gillespie's, yeah.
Basement, wasn't
Uh-huh. And you remember what we used to do down there?
it? Horse around.
Smoke and drink.
Yeah.
Greg hasn't been well.
No.
Remember, we took our slot car track. You remember putting that all together?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody pulled their slot car, and we put all the track together. So we had one straightaway, and then it had a lot of winding track. And you remember what Dylan did with the erector set? He built a car for the slot car and put an erector set and motor on it with about a 30-foot extension cord. And it pretty much was a steamroller running into the wall at the end. So what was the reaction to your parents? Did they think you had joined a gang, or did they not care, or did they think this was like one notch up from the Boy Scouts?
That's about it. My parents didn't care one way or another.
I don't think my parents had an opinion. It was a lot of things I did they didn't have an opinion on. So, but you know, actually the car club was a good thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, we actually had a good formation and did a lot of good things, and I found the other day in my memorabilia that we had a little card that said it was a courtesy card for people that break down in the roads.
You have been assisted by a member of the Steeds Car Club.
And I had one of them. I think that's all I was issued, but I only had one. I never used it. But anyway, I think my parents were good with it. We never caused any problems that way. Not that they knew about.
You know, a lot of the current crowd, especially the rat rod crowd, who were wonderful. They've been such a cool thing in the hobby, but I think they're under the misconception that every club back in the 50s and 60s was just like the clubs they saw in the juvenile delinquent movies. And I think we were basically the Kingston Trio in matching jackets or something back then. And we were pretty, Madras shirts and Continental slacks, and there weren't a whole lot of greasers in the club. So, Northwest Car Club Council, you remember that?
Northwest Car Club Council was a great honor for a small car club like ours. I thought that was a pretty amazing thing, and we were in there with a lot of big car clubs.
The big kids, yeah.
All the big kids.
Yeah, back then in Tacoma, you were only a real club if you had a jacket and a plaque, which of course we had both. Our original jackets were black; they weren't blue like this, and they had a whole different logo on the back. But and then getting into the Northwest Car Club Council, there was the toppers and the rickshaws.
The Demonos.
Demonos, yeah. There were about a dozen clubs, and they were kind of the clubs in town. So we felt that was a pretty big deal to.
And those were the guys that had those clubs when we kind of became part of that. They were the clubs that actually had guys that had show cars, or a few.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a step that we were basically guys with a lot of us with our first car, and the cars were nothing special at the time we started the thing.
Yeah. Fundraisers, you remember some of our fundraisers?
And car washes.
I don't
These guys.
remember the fundraisers.
We're talking 50 years ago.
You lost us there.
Well,
Give us an idea.
Yeah, car washes.
We had remember the car wash?
Well, multiple and just generic, and nothing sticks out from the car wash.
So you guys just cue me with the lines, and I'll tell the story.
Yeah.
Wake me up when you're done.
So we had the car wash out at my sister's apartment in Lakewood.
Oh yeah.
And we made just enough money to go and buy us all lunch at a drive-in there. That was really a golden time, I think, for a lot of us. And I have obviously a lot of great memories of it, but how do we weren't the jocks in school. We certainly weren't the intellectual crowd in school. We were kind of the gearheads. So is there any kind of lasting thing from that, you think?
We took that as a part of our life. I think the club was something we did. It was all through our high school years. It was all through our driving years. Of course, after the high school years were finished, then of course a lot of us dropped away from that. We had, in those days, we were going into the military right after high school. But I think while we were in high school, it became a part of us, and it didn't stand out in that way. It just was a part of what we were then, and that's a bunch of car lovers and a bunch of kids that wanted to be together because we were all good friends.
Do you remember the garage floor and the statute of limitations has run out?
We can't talk about that deal. Yeah, that's there's still an warrant out.
Okay, so we found some asphalt and repaired a garage floor that needed repairing with this found asphalt. So
at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Who leaves hot asphalt out? So,
Who picks it up?
Yeah, we do. I know Greg and Doug are heavily into cars still. A lot of our original members are. Dale, are you?
Just drifted out.
Okay.
I've not followed it the way you guys have. Doug
Okay.
and Greg are building cars.
Yeah.
You've had unique cars all down the line.
Cheap, I think is the word.
I'm driving a Toyota.
Yeah. Greg had a reputation for being just perfect. When Greg built a car, every wire was there wasn't a curve in it. It was perfect. Every piece of copper tubing had the perfect angle on it. And you now have you've got a 36 coupe
36
now?
coupe.
And it's the same way. What made you that meticulous, you think?
I have no idea, and you tell me about this from back then. I didn't realize even when I was 16 I was like that, but I've always been meticulous. I don't know why. Couldn't tell you what. But it's paid off, in the long run. I've been able to restore my own car, and I've been happy with it. It's been well.
Do you remember racing me in your 56 Chev?
Yes, I remember. Well, I raced it in my 40 too.
Okay. You remember who won?
in my 40, I would beat everybody. So
But
I
in
don't
your
know about the
56?
56, I don't really remember.
I remember very well.
Because you won?
Because I won. Yeah,
That's
he had a
why I
very
don't
nice
remember.
56 Chev, and I had a okay, nice 54 Olds that probably outweighed your Chev by 400 pounds, and I still managed to beat you along 6th Avenue. Kids, don't do this at home. Greg and I, for years, talked about starting the club back up, and just tossed out the idea back and forth, and it finally the time rolled around. About almost 4 years ago, we put the word out that we were going to start the club back up, and we were figuring they'd be lucky if there were 3 or 4 people there. Greg, you remember what happened at that meeting?
Yeah, there was a lot of people at that meeting. I don't remember how many, like 12, 13,
16.
16
Yeah.
people. And then it just snowballed from there. We just kept going and going. Everybody wanting to join.
The membership we're at about 70 members right now, but it was Dale or Doug that made the comment that obviously there was we weren't the only ones that felt this way. There was a need for this, and that's why it took off. And I think we're at 70 members now, and of those there's probably 40 that are real active. Any thoughts on why something that happened so long ago just picked up and took off so well again?
I think as baby boomers, we all have a love for certain things that possibly the new generations don't have, and those groups are still alive and well and still active in that particular way. I mean, they love cars. We did love cars. We all loved cars. Everybody in high school loved cars. Mm-hmm. It was that's the way we were raised. We all loved rock and roll music. We all loved all of those things that were really normal for the teenager in 1965.
Yeah.
And I think right now all of us would like to relive those days because they were as good as they get.
Yeah.
It was a good world and it was a good life.
Maybe I'm naive, but I think American Graffiti actually, of course it romanticizes it back then, but I think it's not too far off the mark. We were at Frisco Freeze all the time. That's the big drive-in in Tacoma, the north end of Tacoma. We were there 7 nights a week, dang near, and just having a great time. And I think a perfect night back then was, you were in your 56 Chevy or your 54 Olds or your whatever, and the Whalers were on the radio, and you're parked at Frisco Freeze, and there's a cute girl talking to you. I mean, life was perfect. It was
the only thing got in our way is schoolwork.
Yeah.
It got in our way a little bit, but
not mine.
It was.
I didn't bother with it.
Yeah, but it was a great time, I think, and I think we relive it a little bit here.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised this came back. It actually started as kind of initially just a social outlet for some guys with time on their hands, and now we're all into Geezerville. We've got a little bit of expendable cash, and guys are going back, getting the cars they wish they could have had when they're 16. They're able to do that. I'm not surprised that it took off.
Yeah.
Not surprised at all.
And to be walking around at a car show or at some car function, and there's these guys that I was hanging out. There's a great picture. In fact, you're probably looking at it right now of Greg and I in the 5th grade. Sitting in one of our front yards. There's a great picture of Dale and I back then with a couple friends of ours that weren't in the club, John and Frank Almquist, but I think that was also about the 5th grade.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite pictures back then is you were in front of my house in your 55 Chev, and I'm standing there, talking to you, and I forget if Bob was in the car or what, but it was just a picture of what it was like back then. It was great.
Lance was always looking for a ride. He never had his car was either broke down or he didn't have one at the time, so he was always.
All right, I'm gonna tell a secret here that these guys were involved in. I blew up the motor in my 48 Chev. Greg was taking the motor out of his 40 Chev to replace it with a V8 327.
That was a 283.
283. And so I took the engine from his 40. Do you remember what I paid you for?
Not really.
I gave you a pizza. I traded him a pizza. I worked at Pizza Haven in Tacoma. He gave me his motor for a pizza. I have a book coming out that's probably out by the time you see this, and on the cover of the book is a photograph of me underneath this 48 Chev. Doug bent over the engine compartment. You basically just see his butt and his legs, and another friend of ours at the front end of the car putting the motor in, and I paid you guys pizzas to install that motor for me.
I remember that.
Your staff can probably recognize the pay scale.
Yeah. No, you don't get pizza later. I kind of asked this earlier, but is there something at this day that's warm and fuzzy that makes you feel good that's from back then, something you picked up from back then?
You know, I got to say one thing. I never would have believed in that very first meeting we had that it would lead us to being on television. And
They didn't have television back then.
I was suspect at the fact that we could have been on some sort of lineup, but never on television. Warm and fuzzy. I think it's such a great thing to see that the club is a part of us and has grown into what it is again. But as far as I don't think that it can give an individual feel for it. I think I just have a warm feeling for the club and what it was and what it is today.
How about you, Dale?
It's more of the same, really. It's just more an integral part of my youth. Nothing in particular, one aspect. It was a social venue that we, made some friends I've still got, and that was what it was. And now it's evolved. It looks like it's come back around, and I'm real happy to see what's taking place.
Yeah. How about you, Greg?
I feel the same way. It's just like getting together with the old guys again, and it's just a lot of fun. This whole thing is just fun to me. So it's great.
The things that happen in our youth that form who we are as adults, I'm very grateful to these guys, and I had a just great time when I was back 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, and these guys were my security blanket. I could always count on these guys. They were always there for me. The rest of the guys in the club were. For that, guys, I am eternally grateful, and thank you very much for being on the show and coming back into the club. Greg and Doug are active in the club, and Dale lives 150 miles away, and when he can get here, he participates in stuff. So again, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you very much for watching the show this week. I have had such a great time sharing the history of the Steeds Car Club with you. And as you can see surrounding me, a whole bunch of the current members of the club. Thank you all very much for being on the show today. And Doug and Dale and Greg, thank you so much for your interviews. And thank you very much for watching the show. If you don't watch the show, I don't have a show, so thank you. And we will see you again next week. Until then, bye-bye.